She laughed, right in the middle of my pitch. Not a nervous chuckle, not a kind attempt to hide doubt. A full, sharp, effortless laugh that cut through the room like glass breaking on tile. "You're serious?" Christina blinked, pushing her wine glass away. "You really think you can turn this app into something real?" I just stared at her. She wasn't joking. We were sitting in her high-rise apartment, sunlight pouring in through the windows like it belonged more to her than the rest of the city. She'd just gotten a promotion, some client relations role at a major corporate firm she never stopped name-dropping. I thought she'd be proud of me too. I thought she'd see it. The long nights, the endless debugging, the freelance contracts, I took just to fund this prototype. She tilted her head, smile still lingering like a stain. "Franklin, I love that you're passionate, I really do. But you're not some tech genius. You're not that guy. You fix old laptops in your garage. That's your lane." That was the night I stopped seeing her as my future. She wasn't just doubting my project. She was dismissing me. The same woman who once held my hand in lecture halls, who called me brilliant after late-night coding marathons in college, was now looking at me like I was beneath her. Like I was embarrassing her by daring to dream in her presence. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that what I'd built already had users, that I had a meeting with someone from an incubator, that I'd figured out a back-end architecture that even Curtis, my most critical coding buddy, was impressed by. But I didn't, because I realized something. She didn't need proof. She needed someone who looked like success. I wasn't wearing a suit. I didn't drive a BMW. I didn't talk in boardroom buzzwords. So I left her apartment quietly that night. And by the time she saw me again, standing beside her CEO on a conference stage, being introduced as his newest partner, my name was the one echoing in every corner of the room. The same name she once laughed at. My name is Franklin Rhodes, and for most of my adult life, I've walked the line between invisible and underestimated. I wasn't born into money. I didn't graduate top of my class. I didn't wear ambition like a badge or hang degrees on the walls. What I had was quiet persistence, the kind that doesn't make noise but never quits. I built things, systems, ideas, apps, lines of code, that turned into function. Function that turned into solutions. Solutions that eventually changed my life. But before all of that, there was Christina. We met in sophomore year. She walked into class 15 minutes late with her Starbucks cup, faux leather tote, and enough presence to make the professor pause mid-sentence. I was the guy in the back row with a laptop covered in cracked stickers and fingers stained with graphite from my sketchbook. She sat next to me because every other seat was full. I didn't speak to her that day. I couldn't. She was lightning in heels and I was static, clinging to a corner, but fate, or maybe stubborn proximity, kept putting us side by side. One day, I helped her fix a corrupted project file 5 minutes before a submission deadline. She said, "You're good at this." I shrugged and said, "I'm just stubborn with problems." She laughed, and something about that laugh wasn't cruel back then. It was soft, warm, like I'd surprised her. We started talking, then studying, then dating. With her, life felt shinier. She had this way of moving through the world like it already belonged to her. She didn't beg for space. She claimed it. She was bold and confident and ambitious, and I was the quiet builder behind the curtain. She didn't understand code, but she loved hearing me explain it. She said I made complicated things sound beautiful. Back then, I believed her. After college, the gap between us began to widen. Christina was recruited straight into one of the top firms in the city, Delta Stratagem. Polished brand, clean glass offices, executive assistants who smiled like billboards. She posted about her new job with filtered photos and words like grind culture and rise and slay. I was still freelancing, fixing broken systems, writing code under different names, eating microwave ramen while optimizing servers for small businesses who couldn't afford real IT departments. At first, she cheered me on. She said I was doing what I loved, and that she admired that I didn't sell out. But admiration turned to irritation. The first time she snapped at me about money, it was a joke. You know, if I didn't pay for dinner, we'd be splitting breadsticks and air. I laughed. Sort of. But her jokes kept sharpening. She'd get home and sigh when she saw me still at my desk. All this work, Franklin, and nothing to show for it? I don't even know what your job title is. Sometimes I wondered if she stayed with me out of nostalgia. Other times I knew exactly why. Because I didn't demand much. Because I made her feel smarter. Because she could talk about branding analytics while I listened quietly, asking questions like I was impressed. But there was love too. Or something that resembled it in the moments between all the silence. She bought me a new laptop for my birthday once. Said it was time to upgrade. I knew it was her way of saying, build faster, not build better, but I took it. I let myself believe it was a sign she still believed in me. Then came the pitch. I'd spent nearly a year working on an app. A sleek, simple interface that bridged a massive security gap I'd noticed while doing contract work. I wasn't just passionate. I was obsessed. I stayed up nights refining the code, building mock-ups, testing it on test environments until my eyes bled. When I finally showed it to her, she stared at the screen for maybe 10 seconds. Then that laugh. The one that didn't sound soft anymore. "You're serious?" she said, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "Franklin, this is cute. It really is. But do you actually think you can scale something like this? Who's going to fund you? You don't even have a company name." Didn't respond right away. I was too busy trying to keep my face from showing just how deep her words landed. She poured wine and kept going. "I mean, come on. You should be focusing on finding a real job, something stable. You're not in college anymore. It's time to grow up." That night, I realized something painful. She didn't love the version of me I was trying to become. She loved the version of me that was manageable, modest, dreaming in safe, quiet corners. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply said, "Okay." And 2 days later, I packed up my things while she was at work. Left a note that just read, "Go build your dream. I'll build mine." We didn't speak again, not for a long time. But as it turns out, silence can be a powerful builder too. And what I built in the months that followed, brick by digital brick, was more than just an app. It was the foundation of a life she wouldn't recognize, a life she would come to stand beneath. Because one day, when she least expected it, the man she laughed at would be introduced to her entire company. Not as a guest, but as her CEO's partner. Was almost funny how betrayal never shows up with a sign. It slips in quietly, smiles first, sharpens later. After I left Christina, I poured everything into the app. My schedule stopped making sense. I'd sleep at odd hours, forget to eat, forget the difference between ambition and survival. Curtis and I were working out of an old co-working space downtown that smelled like burnt coffee and late nights. He was brilliant, cynical, and unapologetically direct. If something didn't work, he said so. If I looked tired, he told me to shower. If a line of code wasn't efficient, he deleted it mid-sentence. I trusted him because he never pretended. Christina, on the other hand, had perfected the art of performance, and I hadn't realized how much of my life had become one until I stepped off her stage. But ghosts have a funny way of reappearing just when you think you've buried them. It started with a text from Rachel. She was Christina's old college roommate. We hadn't talked in over a year, but her message came late one night, just one sentence. "Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time before replying, "Why?" Her response came fast. "She's been talking, telling people you left because you couldn't handle her success, that you were jealous, that you were unstable." I felt my stomach twist, not from the words, but from how easily I believed she said them. The woman I knew back then would have never thrown me under the bus, not publicly. But maybe she wasn't the woman I thought I knew. Maybe she never was. Rachel sent screenshots, DMs, snippets of group chat messages where Christina mocked my project, called it garage code nonsense, and joked that I probably still used Reddit as a business model. It wasn't just personal, it was strategic. She was curating an image, one where I was small and fragile, and she was better off without me. And it worked. People believed her, because she wore success like armor, and I was still fighting to earn my first real paycheck. I didn't respond to Rachel after that. What could I say? "Thanks for the heads up. I'll go scream into my pillow now." Instead, I turned back to the code. Let it numb me. Let it swallow the sting. But the betrayal didn't end there. A week later, I was walking into a local networking mixer, an invite-only event hosted by an incubator Curtis had been trying to get us into for months. He pulled some strings and we were finally in. It wasn't flashy. No red carpets or champagne. Just badge tags, notepads, and a room full of people who controlled real money. I was nervous, but ready. We had a pitch deck, a beta version of the app, a timeline, a plan. Curtis was scanning the room when he nudged me hard with his elbow. I looked up and froze. Christina was standing near the far wall, talking to a small group of sharply dressed executives, laughing like she owned the oxygen in the room. And right beside her, a tall, silver-haired man who looked far too familiar from LinkedIn photos and news interviews, Richard Green, CEO of Delta Stratagem, her CEO. My stomach dropped. "You didn't know she was with Delta?" Curtis asked, eyes still on her. "She's on their event board. She helped organize this." I nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I knew. I just didn't think I'd end up in the same room. Not like this. He studied me. "Want to leave?" I shook my head. "No, this is our shot." Curtis respected that. He didn't say another word, but as I made my way toward the investors' lounge to set up, Christina's voice carried through the air, clear, polished, and cruelly familiar. And the guy I was dating? He thought building an app made him Steve Jobs. Couldn't even land a real job. I mean, bless his heart, but I had to choose between supporting a fantasy and living in reality. The men around her laughed softly. One of them raised an eyebrow and said, "What's he doing now?" She shrugged. "Probably still coding in his mom's basement." And that was it. The knife. Curtis saw my expression shift but didn't comment. He just walked with me into the next room and said quietly, "Then we show them exactly who you are." That night, we pitched to 4 investors. 3 of them were intrigued. One asked for a meeting the next morning, but it wasn't the feedback. That stuck with me. It was the moment I saw Christina again, this time watching from the back of the room. Her smile faltered when she saw us on stage. Her posture stiffened. For the first time, I think she realized I didn't disappear. I was just getting started. But the damage she'd done, the humiliation, the reputation she'd helped build about me, still hung in the air. Investors respected traction, but they also trusted perception. And Christina was perception. She managed accounts, she had reach, she had sway. The emotional dilemma wasn't whether I wanted revenge. It was whether I could build something that would succeed in spite of her whispering in the right ears. Because, what do you do when someone you once loved rewrites your story to make themselves look better? You write it back. Louder. But louder, in my case, didn't mean angrier. It meant smarter. It meant becoming undeniable. And I was ready. Franklin's fingers hovered above his keyboard, but nothing on the screen moved. Lines of code that once made sense now looked foreign. Each keystroke felt heavier than the last. His body sat in the co-working space, but his mind was still back in that lounge, still hearing Christina's voice echo through that crowded room. She hadn't just laughed at him. She'd erased him, reduced him to a caricature, a footnote in her version of events. To the people at that mixer, he was now the fantasy guy, the ex-boyfriend who couldn't make it, the one still playing tech entrepreneur like it was a hobby instead of a vision. Her words had reached ears that mattered. And Franklin wasn't sure if all the code, all the late nights, all the breakthroughs he and Curtis had fought for, could shout loud enough to undo that. The worst part? It still hurt. He hated that it did. Hated that, even after everything, after walking away from her, after building something real, after getting the attention of major investors, Christina still had the power to punch through his confidence like paper. It made him question everything. Was this enough? Was he enough? He hadn't slept properly in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her expression. The dismissive smile, the narrowed eyes, the way she turned his name into a joke. Curtis tried to break him out of it. "You know she's scared, right?" he said one night over greasy Chinese takeout, watching Franklin pick at his food. "If she wasn't, she wouldn't be talking about you at all." Franklin wanted to believe that. But fear and logic rarely walked side by side. He felt torn between two versions of himself. The man he was becoming and the man she'd tried to define. The one chasing a future, and the one dragged backward by a past still clinging to his name. His mother called one evening, her voice full of warmth and concern. "You sound tired, baby. You sleeping okay?" He almost lied. Almost said, "Yeah, just busy." But the silence stretched too long. She didn't press. She never did. Instead, she said, "Whatever. Storm you're walking through, don't forget who you are. You've never needed noise to be powerful." That stuck, but the pressure still mounted. Their app had a major update due in a week, and the investor follow-up meetings were scheduled for the following Monday. The code had to be flawless, the pitch tighter than ever. They needed proof, real, traction. And Christina's words, her network, her influence, they were all shadows hanging over every move he made. And then came the message. "Rachel again, heads up." Christina's trying to pitch a similar product to a contact at Helix Point. Franklin's blood turned to ice. He stared at the message, rereading it again and again. It didn't make sense. Christina wasn't in tech. She didn't code. She barely understood what Franklin had created, even when they were together. But it wasn't about the product. It was about erasure, about jumping ahead in line, claiming space that wasn't hers to claim. She wanted to overwrite his narrative with hers. Again. That night, Franklin couldn't sit still. He paced. He wrote and rewrote every line of code. He reviewed every client feedback form they'd received. He called Curtis at 1:13 a.m. "She's trying to take credit," Franklin said, voice low, exhausted. Curtis didn't sound surprised. "Then we show them the difference between what looks smart and what is smart." Franklin didn't sleep. He worked, hour after hour, rebuilding the UX interface to make it sleeker, faster, more intuitive, creating walkthroughs, prepping demo reels, writing internal notes with answers to every possible objection an investor might throw at them. It wasn't just about surviving now, it was about proving that his idea, could not be replicated with polish and a smile. And in the quiet moments, between the work, between the code, between the emails and the long silences that came when Curtis fell asleep at his desk, Franklin fought with himself, fought against the part of him that still wanted to ask why she had to mock, why she had to twist his passion into a punchline, why she wasn't content with just moving on, but he knew the answer. Deep down, he knew, because Christina didn't want to move on. She wanted to win, and in her world, someone had to lose. But Franklin wasn't that person anymore. Not the dreamer she could belittle. Not the kid fixing motherboards on a folding table in his garage. Not the man she walked over on her way to a corner office. Now he was the architect of something real, and no amount of whispers could bury that truth. So he kept building, not out of revenge, but out of something stronger. Resolve. Franklin was almost ready. The app was stable, the pitch deck bulletproof, the beta feedback overwhelmingly positive. Curtis had secured another meeting, this time not with just any investor, but a senior partner at Helix Point Ventures. It wasn't a sit-down in a cafe or a quick Zoom call. It was a private tech demo at their headquarters, one floor below, the office of Richard Green himself. "This is it," Curtis said, tightening his tie before they entered the building. The real moment. Franklin nodded, jaw tight. He'd barely slept, his nerves pulled taut like wires under strain. He knew this wasn't just a pitch, it was proof. Proof to Helix Point, to Curtis, to himself, and to Christina if word got back to her. But the universe wasn't done testing him, because when they reached the reception, something stopped him cold. A familiar voice. Yes, she's here for the noon presentation. Christina Ward, representing Delta Stratagem's Innovation Branch. Franklin turned slowly, and there she was, Christina. Dressed in a storm gray blazer, flawless as ever, hair pinned into a tight coil that screamed control. She didn't notice him at first. She was too busy speaking to the receptionist, confirming her credentials. But when she turned around, her eyes met his, and for 1 second, everything stopped. He saw it. The flicker of panic, the flash of recognition. Then, just like that, it vanished. Her expression reset, a polite, neutral smile. Franklin, she said as if greeting an old colleague instead of the man she'd once ridiculed. I didn't expect to see you here. He matched her tone. Neither did I. Curtis stepped forward, his posture stiff. We're here for the 12:15 demo with Helix Point's senior board. Something shifted in Christina's smile. The corners stayed lifted, but her eyes sharpened. Ah, so are we. The words landed. Like lead. Franklin's breath hitched. Delta Stratagem is pitching today? She nodded, calm as a still lake. Yes, we're presenting a prototype for a real-time security interface for remote financial services. Similar to what I believe you're working on, if I remember correctly. Curtis stepped in before Franklin could speak. That's a funny coincidence. We thought your firm specialized in marketing and account management. Christina's gaze didn't waver. We're expanding. The receptionist returned then, asking each group to wait in separate meeting lounges. Franklin followed Curtis silently down the hall, his pulse thudding behind his ears. Once alone, Curtis turned to him. She stole it. Franklin stared blankly. Curtis repeated it slower, more certain. She stole your pitch, your entire framework, or at least enough of it to dress it up and make it hers. Franklin sat down hard in the nearest chair, the blood draining from his face. I never shared it with her, not after I left. She didn't see the updates. But she saw enough, didn't she? Curtis said. She saw the bones, and she has enough access to mimic the surface. They'll dress it in fancy UI and buzzwords, but the structure's yours. Franklin clenched his fists. Not again. Not this. It wasn't enough that she mocked him. Now she was trying to replace him, to take his idea, polish it up, and present it in a boardroom where perception often outweighed innovation. For a moment, he felt it, that familiar weight in his chest. The feeling of being outnumbered, outpolished, outplayed. But then something colder cut through the fear. Clarity. He turned to Curtis. Let's finish our prep. And when we get in that room, we don't defend what we've built. We own it. Curtis gave a single nod. Damn right. Because this time, Franklin wouldn't let her define the narrative, not when he'd written the blueprint. The boardroom smelled faintly of citrus and power. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood table where 5 executives sat, poised and expectant. Helix Point's logo gleamed behind them in sharp metallic letters. Nothing soft about the space, nothing forgiving. Curtis plugged in the HDMI cable with a steady hand. Franklin stood beside him, spine straight, chest tight. The digital display lit up. Their logo. Their name. Veralink Security. Simple. Clean. Real. Christina sat directly across the table with 2 members of her Delta Stratagem team. A small tablet rested in front of her. She wore the expression of someone rehearsed and ready, legs crossed, pen in hand like she was already writing the outcome of this meeting. She glanced at Franklin once, briefly. No smile. Just enough to remind him she was watching. The lead executive cleared his throat. Thank you both for presenting today. We've reviewed your initial proposals. We'll give each group 15 minutes to walk us through the product, followed by questions. Curtis nodded. Understood. We'll go first. If that's all right? Please. Franklin took a breath as Curtis began the intro. He wasn't nervous anymore. Not really. He felt something different now, centered. Everything they'd built over the last year pulsed through the lines of code behind that screen. Every sleep-deprived night, every failed demo, every bug, every fix, every doubt, every moment when it felt like no one was watching, no one cared. He spoke clearly, confidently, when it was his turn. He didn't use fancy words. He didn't quote trends or market statistics. He walked them through the interface. He let the simplicity speak. He showed them the seamless integration, the real-time alerts, the intelligent breach prevention protocol that adapted dynamically without manual input. He answered their questions calmly, fluidly, without reaching. At one point, one of the executives leaned forward. Can you explain how the AI prioritizes threat response in cross-network intrusions? Franklin smiled. It doesn't just prioritize. It reorders based on behavioral patterns. Each network signature becomes a fingerprint. If it detects a new one that mimics past breach pathways, it reroutes its resources before the intrusion is even complete. Curtis added, the engine self-trains. Each interaction strengthens it. The executive nodded, impressed. That's not in your deck. It should be. Franklin replied, some things are better shown than told. They finished to silence. The kind that lingered just a little too long. Then a few murmurs, then notes being taken. Christina stood when called next. Her smile returned. She introduced her team, flipped open her tablet, and began walking through a demo that looked, at first glance, startlingly familiar. The UI was cleaner, glossier, full of corporate sheen. But beneath the polish, Franklin recognized it. The architecture, the core functions. Even the phrasing of certain descriptions mirrored words he'd once spoken to her. Words she'd laughed at, dismissed. Now, she was using them like they were hers. Her presentation was perfect, almost too perfect. Every screen transitioned with practiced timing. Every buzzword hit on cue. But Franklin wasn't watching the screen. He was watching the panel. And slowly, he saw it. They were nodding. Less. As Christina dove deeper, the cracks began to show. Her answers to technical questions were vague, reliant. On her team, when asked about the adaptive logic behind breach management, she redirected. Well, our algorithm operates on a foundational model that incorporates machine learning principles, she said. A pause. One executive frowned. That's very broad. What specific training sets are you using? She faltered. Her mouth opened slightly, but her eyes flicked to her colleague. He answered for her, stumbling through a half-coherent explanation about generic datasets and modular testing. Curtis leaned toward Franklin and whispered, they don't understand. What they built. Franklin nodded slowly. Because they didn't. Then came the final blow. The same executive who'd complimented Franklin's adaptive fingerprinting asked Christina's team if their system supported anticipatory rerouting. She blinked. I'm sorry, could you clarify? He didn't smile. You've presented a security framework that claims dynamic adaptation, so we're asking if it actively anticipates breach vectors based on historical learning, or if it's just reactive. Her silence was all the answer they needed. Someone cleared their throat. A pen clicked. Christina forced a smile, but it was thinner now, fractured. The meeting wrapped with brief thanks, handshakes, polite smiles. The usual. No decisions would be announced today. We'll be in touch, the lead said, and everyone knew that meant, we already know. As the room cleared, Christina approached. Curtis disappeared without a word. He knew this wasn't his moment. She stopped in front of Franklin, arms folded, expression unreadable. You're better at presenting than I remembered, she said. Franklin met her gaze. You're worse at stealing than I expected. Her jaw clenched. I didn't steal anything. You didn't need to. You watched. You listened. And then you tried to wear it like it was yours. You're not the only one with ideas, Franklin. No, he said calmly. But I'm the only one in that room who could answer the questions without phoning a friend. She stepped closer. Why does it always have to be a war with you? It's not. You just don't like when you lose one. Her voice lowered. You don't know what it's like in my world. What I have to do to stay ahead. Franklin tilted his head. You know what's sad? I actually do. I lived in your world. I just chose not to sell my soul to stay in it. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. He turned to walk away, then paused. You laughed at me once, remember that? She didn't answer. He smiled, not cruelly, but with the kind of quiet peace that only comes after finally letting go. I hope you never forget it. He left the boardroom, not with fanfare, not with applause, just purpose. That was enough. The Helix Point decision came just 4 days later. Curtis burst into the workspace holding the envelope like it contained a crown. He didn't say anything at first, just tossed it onto Franklin's desk and leaned back, arms crossed, grinning like a man who already knew he'd won a bet. Franklin opened it slowly, knowing what it was but needing the confirmation written in ink. We are pleased to formally extend this strategic partnership to Veralink Security, selected as our exclusive development team for adaptive financial cybersecurity protocols moving forward. His throat tightened. The words blurred, slightly at the edges. He hadn't realized he'd stopped breathing. Curtis clapped a hand on his shoulder. You did it, man. We did it. But Franklin shook his head. Quiet. Clear. No. She made sure I'd never forget why. Curtis didn't argue. He understood. The public announcement hit every business channel by the following week. Richard Green himself issued the press statement, naming Veralink as Helix Point's newest tech partner and lauding their innovative approach, unmatched responsiveness, and built-from-scratch integrity. No corporate speak, no fluff, just facts. The news spread fast. Faster than Christina could contain. Delta Stratagem issued a vague congratulatory message, but insiders whispered the truth. That their prototype was just a shadow, that they hadn't been chosen, that they couldn't even answer technical questions without stalling. Within a month, Christina's department was restructured. 2 months later, she was no longer with the firm. Franklin watched it all unfold in silence. He didn't gloat, didn't post cryptic tweets or leave clever comments. He just worked, built, delivered. Every update Veralink rolled out gained traction. Clients came faster than they could onboard. Within 3 quarters, they were expanding, hiring, leading discussions in rooms that once would have shut them out. Without a second glance, and that's when the knock came. Not figurative. Literal, it was 8:42 on a Thursday night. Franklin was home, reviewing client audit reports with a glass of wine when someone rang the doorbell. He opened it, and there she was, Christina. Soaking wet from the rain, clutching her purse like it held pieces of a life she couldn't hold together anymore. Her mascara had smudged. Her expression was hollow. She didn't speak right away. Franklin didn't either. Finally, she whispered, "Can I come in?" He leaned against the doorframe. Why? Her eyes glistened. Because I don't know who else would understand what it feels like to lose everything. He studied her. She didn't look like the woman who once mocked him over wine. She looked like someone who had spent all her currency trying to be someone else, only to realize that what she bought was worth nothing. I didn't come to apologize, she said. I'm not even sure what I would say, but I do know I was wrong. Franklin remained still. She exhaled. I kept climbing so fast I didn't see who I was stepping on, or what I was becoming. I lied, I twisted things, and you... Her voice cracked. You didn't deserve any of it. He let the silence speak. She stepped back as if expecting him to slam the door, but instead he said softly, You didn't just betray me. You made sure everyone else did too. That was the part that burned. Christina nodded. I know. And it's too late to fix any of it. I just needed you to know that I see it now. For a moment, he almost felt the weight return. The ache, the rage, the need for her to feel what he felt, but he didn't need it anymore, because she was feeling it, all of it. The difference was he wasn't buried under it anymore. He was standing on top of it. He shook his head slowly. You were right about one thing, he said. I'm not that guy. I'm not the dreamer with no plan. I'm not the joke in your story. I'm the reason your version didn't become the ending. Her lip trembled. He stepped back and closed the door. This time, the click of the lock didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a monument. Months passed. Veralink doubled in size. Their AI won awards for innovation in real-time security. Curtis became CTO. Franklin was offered speaking slots at tech summits and university keynotes, but he only took one, a small conference where he'd once been rejected for not having a scalable vision. He walked onto the same stage they'd turned him away from 3 years ago and started his talk with the words, They told me I wasn't ready. But what they meant was, I didn't look the part. So I built the part. And then the room. He didn't mention Christina. He didn't need to. She had become irrelevant in the one way that mattered most. History had no place to file her anymore. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came quietly, unexpected. One afternoon, a new junior developer nervously walked into Franklin's office with a resume in hand and said, "Hey, I heard you might be willing to look at this." Franklin smiled. "Of course." The kid beamed, eyes full of the kind of raw hope Franklin once carried himself. He read the resume. Paused. "You studied at Howard?" The kid nodded. "Yeah, I read your story. You gave a talk there last semester. Honestly, it made me believe I didn't have to wait for permission." Franklin looked up, the quiet heat of pride spreading through his chest. "That's good," he said. "Because you don't." He extended his hand. "Welcome to Veralink." And that was it. Not a standing ovation, not a viral moment, just the passing of something earned. Something powerful. Proof that the best revenge isn't watching someone fall, it's building something so strong they can never touch it again. Not with doubt, not with whispers, not even with regret, because the real revenge isn't winning once. It's winning quietly, over and over, until the world forgets who tried to stop you, and only remembers your name, Franklin Rhodes, the man she laughed at. Now the man whose name gets introduced, right before the CEO.